Do you usually get this turnout?
Yeah. In the summer it'll be filled in, every chair will be full. Something. Careful.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. Thank you.
No, this is nice because if you're at home,
personal thing.
you can watch it.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Stormwater and Flood Committee meeting for April. I'm going to introduce our committee members just so that everybody knows who's here. Chip Smith, right over here. He's retired U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as well as a town resident, and he's very active in local resilience efforts. Bruce Fry, right here. Everybody in town knows Bruce Fry. He's a past member of town council and a past chairman of the 4th of July committee. So.
And the flood committee, come on.
And the flood committee, I'm sorry, and my predecessor. So, and also very active environmentally. John Russell is retired surveyor. He's involved locally with wetlands, flooding, and bay topography. I think that covers it. Okay. Bill Pepper is a resident of Lake Bethany, an area that floods quite often, and so he's very interested in this sort of thing. Our newest member, who was just appointed by council at last month's council meeting, is Christine Thompson. Christine is a resident of Bethany West and almost a permanent resident, very soon, who's quite active in local resilience and environmental issues. Unfortunately, we are missing two members of the committee, Matt Kirks and Bob Collins today. Both of them had personal situations come up out of town. The other important person, very important person up here is Cliff Gravier, our town manager.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, do I have approval of the agenda?
So approved. Second.
Second. Those in favor? Aye. Approval of the minutes from the January 23rd meeting. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second. Those in favor? Aye. Okay. Today, we are very lucky to have a featured speaker in Danielle Swallow. She's a locally renowned University of Delaware Sea Grant coastal hazard specialist. Danielle is a recipient of both the Mid-Atlantic Sea Grant Award for Outstanding Outreach and the University of Delaware College of Earth, Ocean, and Environment's Community Engagement Award. She has 25 years of Delaware climate and coastal experience and is a graduate of New York University. She's going to be addressing projected coastal Delaware climate change as well as possible recommendations for resilience efforts. She's great. I've heard this presentation a few times. It's good. So, thank you, Danielle.
How is everyone doing today? Good. Okay. Yeah, thanks so much, Ron, and I'm always happy that I see you at so many events that I'm at, and you're taking a strong interest in these topics, and I appreciate that. I'm gonna, give a kind of a version of some of the presentations that Ron has seen lately on climate resilience with a focus on the state's new climate projections and some thoughts on how to build climate resilience into our way at life, both in terms of our local property owners as well as community-wide initiatives. Just to start with, I'm with Delaware Sea Grant. We are a NOAA and state-funded program at the University of Delaware. I'm based at the Lewis campus, and we fund research and then carry out extension work and education basically in support of connecting science and information to decisions that foster healthy ecosystems and sustainable fisheries and environmental education and community resilience. And there's a Sea Grant program in every coastal state and territory of the United States, actually. And my role in Sea Grant is as an extension specialist. I'm the coastal hazards specialist working with communities statewide, really, on basically helping to understand weather and climate hazards and how to build resilience to them. And I do that through technical assistance, outreach, and capacity building. And I like to start out this presentation with sort of a refresher on the difference between climate and weather, because I see that get mistaken fairly often. You know, when you're talking to loved ones or whatever, you know, we've had just this past week some of what feels like unseasonably cold weather. And it wouldn't hurt, you know, it wouldn't be surprising, I'd say, for folks to say, well, you know, that just proves that there's no, you know, climate change, there's no global warming and stuff like that. But if they were to say that, they'd be confusing weather with climate and climate with weather. So climate is what you expect and weather is what you get. Okay? So think of it in terms of climate is a long-term average of your weather conditions over very many number of years and decades, even millennia, you know, and these are speaking to broad shifts in our weather patterns. And so if we think about our wardrobe, as we are now getting into, you know, April and the spring season, right, we're going to start packing away our sweaters, you know, our snow boots and coats, because we're anticipating, you know, warmer temperatures, and that's because we live in a mid-Atlantic climate that has warmer springs and summers. Now, we can still get thrown off by today and yesterday, but that's our weather. So weather is just like a kind of, you know, measured over days and hours, you know, maybe a week or two, but climate is that long-term average. That's what I really want you to think about. And when we think about climate change, that's referring to these long-term shifts in the overall climate patterns that we experience, which is driven by global warming. What is global warming? It's the long-term rapid warming of the Earth's surface due to more heat entering the system than leaving it. Typically, about 30% of all the sun's energy would be reflected back by clouds and ice and even atmospheric particles. But since the Industrial Revolution, we've had a lot more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that trap that heat, and so it's not leaving the system. And so over time, you have a much more rapid warming that can't be explained by natural factors alone. And so when in the science community, when they're trying to anticipate what climate change is going to look like, you know, how it's changing, they have to draw on both historical observations, like our past weather records, right, or tree rings and ice, you know, ice cores and things like that. They look at present conditions, but then they've got to anticipate future conditions. And one of the large ways they do that is through a very robust modeling, you know, process where they've gridded the Earth basically in this huge grid that is trying to replicate the physical and natural processes that take place. You know, the interactions between land and water and the clouds and land and so forth. And so each of those grids is kind of representing different complex interactions. And that is fed into models along with oftentimes our past conditions to then churn out expected futures. And you have to sometimes put in parameters into your algorithm. For example, is the rate of global emissions going to stay the same, or is it going to change? Maybe the global community is going to rein in, you know, your greenhouse gas emissions. Maybe it's not. And those things constrain or adjust the models and the futures that they put out. And that is why when we speak to climate projections, we want to emphasize that these are not predictions when we're looking at in the out years. And they're often expressed as a range because we're thinking about different futures, different ways that the global community, responds to greenhouse gas mitigation. Different ways that those big ice sheets in Antarctica, respond to the melting that is kind of driven by warming. And so that's why you'll see a range, okay? So that's just kind of just the really quick and dirty fundamentals. I'm going to now pivot to the state's climate projections. So Delaware recently updated our projections for temperature, precipitation, and sea level rise. And for the first time in over 10 years for temperature and precip, since 2017 for sea level rise. So this is based on the latest science and information. And what we see is that, and the climate projections report both discusses trends that we've seen over history as well as future conditions. And so we've seen an annual temperature increase of 3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1895. And we're anticipating an increase of 3 to 4 degrees by mid-century and another 5 to 9 degrees by 2100. And that's because there's an acceleration that is happening in our global system where greenhouse gas and the warming is accelerating to a point where we'll see more severe warming and climate patterns in the second half of the century. Winter temperatures actually have shown the strongest increases over time. But I think what's important to point out, thinking about what the future is going to be like, is that, in our summer, we always go through periods of really hot weather, right? But we anticipate more number of hot nights and hot days. So this is like, you could think of it as days over 90 degrees. We'll have more days of 90 degrees. Number of hot nights typically means that the nights don't cool down below 75 degrees. And that's significant because for individuals that don't have AC or animals outside or whatnot, that doesn't really give them a chance to really cool off, right? And that also creates a much bigger drain on our energy usage. So there's definitely implications for that. And it goes across all kinds of sectors like our public health sector and our energy and ag sector and so forth. But there's also upsides. We'll see our growing season increase, and that may cause an opportunity for different crops and different markets. Precipitation. Now, this one was the trickiest one for Delaware to put out because our climate is very variable with regard to precipitation in Delaware. It really is. It's just from year to year, there's a lot of variability. But overall, our rainfall has increased 3 inches since 1895. We're projecting another 2 to 4 inches by mid-century, and then interestingly, the models at least are not showing a lot of additional increase in the latter half of the century. Maybe that'll get updated the next time, we put out another robust set of projections, but that's what that's showing. And we think the greatest seasonal increase in precip will be in the winter. So this is interesting, right? So imagine, it's going to be a little bit warmer, but it's going to be maybe a little wetter. So maybe less snow, but you wouldn't think that this year. I recognize that. But again, that was weather. We would anticipate that when we do have some rain events, some of those rain events will be stronger, with more rain dumping in short amount of time, like more 1-inch rainfalls or 2-inch rainfalls. What that really means for us as a community is thinking about how well will our culverts and storm drains, handle that, right? Are they designed for that extra rain? Crops might be impacted, over time, but I would say this, precipitation is just more to watch in terms of how it may contribute to other effects caused by what I'm going to talk to next, which is sea level rise. Sea level rise is essentially, it's the increase in the height of the Earth's ocean, but it sort of expresses itself as an increase in the height of our tides. Our high tides get higher, our low tides get higher. And mean sea level rise, sea levels have accelerated in Delaware in recent decades, and we can see that in this graph. This is a statewide sea level rise composite showing that there is a clear acceleration. We see that locally at the Lewis Tide Gauge and up north at the Reedy Point. And it does also coincide with increasing trends of high tide flooding. We would anticipate that, right? As sea level rise, our high tides are getting higher to begin with. So when we experience flooding at high tide, that's usually when you have a particularly high tide, and that's going to inundate your lower lying properties, and we're going to see more days of that, right? It just coincides naturally with that trend, and so that is matching up in our observations. And the projections say that there's pretty strong confidence that we'll see sea level rise increase by 1.25 to 1.54 feet by 2050. The reason I'm saying there's very high confidence is because what the science community did is they took our historical observations and trends, and then they extrapolated that trend line out to 2050. And then they basically superimposed it with what the models are showing. And they matched really well through 2050. And then they start to deviate. Why? Because at that point, there's more factors that play in. You know, what's going to happen with the ice sheets globally? You know, how much emissions reduction might there be at a global scale? So this is to illustrate, I don't know if at this point it works, but if you see, this is sort of referenced back to 2000, but this is the projections. And each of these projections are a set of scenarios that are representing a possible future, right? A conservative future, which would mean that we're pretty much just treading steady. The red being like the worst case scenario, greenhouse gases actually increase, like out of control, the ice sheets go crazy and melt like crazy, and then there's in-betweens, okay? And so you start to see more of a deviation, and then in some cases an acceleration at the latter part of the century. But I think there's some good news here in that our current observations are tracking toward the intermediate low scenario, which is the purple. So we're not in the worst case, right? Okay, that's good news. We may, though, we believe we're going to see that trajectory kind of hit more toward the intermediate low and intermediate, which is more like the pink and the pink and the purple as the later part of the century, around 2050, and then we'll really see more divergence, right? Because there's some uncertainty there. But I think it's important because when the sea level rise projections came out in 2017, the state was most often quoting the high scenario. And I'm shying away from that. The state is too shying away from that more because that's like over 6 feet of sea level rise, by 2100. So we're not seeing that, but we're going to still see something that's very consequential for us. And here's what I would generally recommend, like as a community, what do you want to plan to? It depends on how much risk you're willing to accept. But if you're planning for critical infrastructure where you really want to make sure that stays dry, you would plan more toward your intermediate high, and then if you're thinking about projects that maybe can tolerate some flooding over time, maybe a park or things like that, you can plan to your intermediate low. Why even have a choice? Why does that even matter? Well, it affects your design costs, for starters, and it affects the range of adaptation options that you have. If you're having to plan to intermediate high, a higher level of like maybe close to 5 feet by the end of the century, that's going to adjust the amount of adaptation options you have available to you as compared to if you're lower, 3 feet or something like that. Does that make sense for folks? Okay, so all of these projections are expressed in the Delaware Climate Action Plan, which was put out by DNREC. It's the state's second climate action plan. It just came out, it says 2025, it really just came out at the start of the year. And it has a number of different chapters, including how the state's going to undertake efforts to rein in emissions statewide. And then it also has a land use chapter. It has different chapters related to addressing flooding and heat. It's geared for state agencies. It's trying to organize the state apparatus to be more responsive and to climate change. But you can definitely, as a community, take away important suggestions and adaptation strategies from it. So I invite you to go to that website. And this is from their report. You know, there's so many different effects that climate change will have, and there's positives too, right? And this is only just some of the effects that we'll have, but I don't want to dwell on all of these. I do want to talk more about sort of compound events, which is essentially when you have maybe a storm come in on top of a high tide to begin with, like a very high tide, or you have like a lot of rain combined with storm surge, you know, then you get compound events. What I think for here locally, the game changer is going to be that we are going to see an increase in the frequency and height of our floods, our daily like high tide flooding. So again, high tide flooding is pretty much just like flooding that occurs in the absence of a particular storm. I'm realizing I should probably change that background picture because that's kind of looking stormy. It could be on a day like this. And we already have, you know, many days of the year when we do experience that flooding on low-lying roads and properties. We're going to just start to see exponential increases. And you know, these different bars are based on the 3 of the different scenarios of sea level rise. Sea level rise is contributing to the height of our tides, therefore, you know, which scenario you're looking at can influence the number of days. But bottom line is we're going to see quite a number more days of high tide flooding. And they're gradually approaching what the Weather Service considers the minor flood stage. This is a threshold that the Weather Service uses to measure when they expect minor flooding locally. So in our case, it's about 1.35 feet above mean high water. So at their buoys, when that water level approaches that, then they kind of might issue a minor flood stage kind of warning. And we'll see that throughout the year at different times. But the persistent minor flooding without significant need or basically input from other weather storms puts Delaware as transitioning into a new flood regime and should be included in climate-smart planning, building and maintaining coastal protections, infrastructure development, and natural resource and agriculture management. So they're saying is like our flood regime is shifting, and we're going to see more minor flooding, but also more days of moderate flooding. Moderate flooding would be characterized by the Weather Service as you're more likely to see some damage, you know, to property, not the same as major flooding, which is even worse, but we'll possibly see more days of that. And what does that mean? We'll have to live with more water in our system, okay? This is, you know, a photo from a nor'easter last October, but it just shows our beautiful wetlands. They play an amazing job at absorbing excess water. That is what they are designed to do. They are great at absorbing and conveying and then discharging water. They do it every day with the tide. They'll do it with storms. But think about the fact that now these wetlands are going to be holding more water to begin with in the absence of a storm. So your storage capacity, right, in your floodplain is going to be slightly diminished because we just are going to have more water. You know, that high tide, that sea level rise is also coming from underground, and we're going to just see more water in the system. So trying to think about how do we adjust our planning to emphasize the need for more storage capacity, I think is going to be critically important to climate resilience in a community like Bethany Beach. So, you know, thinking about like your storm drains or bioswales will potentially be holding more water. You know, our agricultural fields may see saltwater intrusion, sometimes inundation from groundwater up. We'll see erosion. You know, here, this is by Fenwick, but you can see erosion, certainly erosion here, just because, you know, if you do have if you have boat wake or storm waves, that's just stacked on top of higher water to begin with. So there's going to be a little more erosion action that happens. So we need a strategy for resilience. That's the ability to recover from or adapt easily to change. And I like this picture of the Lahaina banyan tree from Maui that was definitely impacted by that Maui fire in 2023 or so. But look, it's rebounding. It's doing what, I don't know, just it's an amazing example of resilience. It took a hit and it took a hit and keeps on ticking, or whatever that commercial is, right? And that's what resilience is about. Like, we may not be able to avoid disruptions, and we're not going to avoid all these impacts, but we can learn to adapt and manage to them and still figure out ways to thrive. And a key part of that concept is how long can life return to normal when there is a disruption? That's the key for a community like this. We may have a day of flooding and roads are impaired and you can't cross the road. We want those hours or days to be minimized. The closer we can get back to normal business, normal activity, that's what keeps the community resilient. So think of that, like we're trying to minimize that length of disruption. So how do we adapt? Well, I'm now speaking from like a property owner perspective. I think importantly, you would want to first know what your risks are in the area. You'd want to know what is the elevation of your property. It's going to be fairly low if you're down here, but knowing precisely what your elevation is important. Are you close to a waterway or wetland, right? Many of you might be. Are you in an evacuation zone? There's a link here. It's a simple tool where you can type in your address and see. A lot of Bethany will be in an evacuation zone. This is used by federal and state authorities to plan for an orderly evacuation in the case of a hurricane. There's an A, B, C, and D category, largely based on your elevation and proximity to water. But they look at other things like traffic patterns and population growth, and they come out with this whole method of assigning different zones. And you could, within one neighborhood, there could be many properties in different zones, okay? But it's good to know what your evacuation zone is. And that tells you something too, if you're in an evacuation zone, like, okay, I've got risk. Are your local swales or drains or gutters well maintained? Because first off, we want to keep our existing infrastructure as well maintained as possible and not have it be impaired so it can do as much of the job as it's meant to do. Is there evidence of erosion by you? You know, if you're along a wetland or a creek or even near a roadbed and you just see a lot of erosion, that could be an example of swift water, that there's a force of water that is degrading that area. Certainly wetlands that are experiencing erosion means you have a degradation of wetland. So some of that capacity, that storage capacity is being impaired. Do other properties drain towards you or away from you? This one's an important one because in our county, you're allowed to use fill, right? And so a lot of places, properties will use fill and they'll elevate themselves out of the floodplain. But then the property next to them, which might have been there beforehand, suddenly finds itself sort of down elevation from that property. So where's that water going to run off to? Because you're thinking about not just tidal sources of flooding, you're thinking about rain. Are there shade trees present? I would say this is more for heat, but also thinking about trees as being really important because of their root structure. Roots help to absorb water and inundation. And is your home storm ready? Has it been well maintained? Is your roof, has it been replaced in a timely fashion, after 20 or 25 years? Do you have storm shutters? Have you elevated? Things like that. There's a tool that Denrick has called the iAdapt tool, which is actually a really great tool if you've never looked at it. I really encourage you to go and check it out. It's for homeowners or property owners. You type in information about your property, including things like the elevation, whether you have a basement or not, what kind of house it is, all kinds of considerations like that go into it. And then it churns out recommendations to help you adapt to flooding. And it's got a lot of great ideas that include info sheets that describe those ideas in more detail. So, I mean, there's a litany of potential things that one can do. I have a few ideas listed here, and I'm pretty sure all of those ideas would be captured in that iAdapt system. But it's going to be uniquely tailored to your property. So really encourage you to look at that. No matter what, you want to be thinking about how to retrofit your house, elevating whatever you can is a good bet. Maintaining the trees around you, the gutters and swales, so that you don't have, debris, you don't have branches, falling on your roof. If you can limit impervious surfaces, even around your own property, you're increasing storage. You're helping that filtration happen, particularly for rain, and we need as much storage in this area as we can possibly get. Community-wide, I think there's so many different measures, but I would say one of the most important is, as a community, is integrating climate projections into all plans and projects. This could include your comprehensive plan, which I know the town, will do, but it also includes emergency operations plans, thinking about how weather and storm conditions will evolve and who's vulnerable. It includes things like downtown development kinds of plans. Just thinking about future conditions, not just assuming everything's present day and static. Investing in flood mitigation projects, which I know the town of Bethany Beach is doing. Increasing freeboard. I know, again, like the town has freeboard, but maybe there's opportunities to look at where additional freeboard might be beneficial. Limiting impervious... Oh, I'm sorry. Freeboard is think of it as a safety net. It's the additional height above what FEMA would call your base flood elevation. So looking at a typical storm and where floodwaters would rise to, the idea is that you want your first floor, your habitable living space, to be above that base flood elevation. So freeboard means elevating your home to above that level, and it's like a safety margin. So another foot, 3 feet, buys you that extra safety margin above floodwaters. So you're not getting your documents, your couch, your belongings all wet. Here's one I like to promote, which is thinking about your natural resources, like your wetlands, your parks, but your shorelines as a form of community infrastructure, your trees. I'm in an HOA. My HOA has one part of the HOA abuts state wetlands, and there were residents that were mowing down wetlands, to kind of improve their view. Of course, there's a whole state permitting issue with that, but I would say, like, our HOA took upon us to put in our covenants that wetlands and buffers are considered a form of community infrastructure. Like, we value those things. They are doing a service for us that are free. And for us to replicate that would cost thousands of dollars. So imagine if all the HOAs did the same and the community at large, and had a conversation and put that out in the public discourse about how valuable the natural resources are, that they're a form of free infrastructure that doesn't cost us a dime. I think that would be helpful to people realizing they need to protect trees, they need to protect wetlands and your natural spaces.
And to just point out, in the town of Bethany Beach, the town actually owns almost a little over 40 acres of wetlands that were purchased just for that purpose. Our nature center is a block of wetlands, and the Walchuk property, which most people don't even see because it's kind of hidden away. But it's a wetland area where a large portion of the town drains to, and there you go, sponge sucks it up. Sorry.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean, the town has been very proactive. compared to towns up and down the coast, this is one of the proactive towns, which is great. Expanding, your natural areas. So again, like thinking about where your wetlands are, parks, any forested areas, if there's any chance that you can expand those, right? You want to create a bigger sponge, essentially what it is. If you can't expand, then just restore, get them as healthy as they can be so that they're doing as robust a job as they can. Use native vegetation if you're seeing, non-native vegetation creeping in, right? And then here's one that I really am going to start encouraging more towns to think about. Now, land use practices can be a really effective tool for building resilience in a community. And I think zoning is one instrument of that. So one thing is that some towns in parts of the country are using zoning overlay districts. And they're creating, in high-risk areas, zoning overlays that may require additional freeboard, so additional elevation above that base flood elevation. They may require other like less impervious surfaces or other kinds of design and engineering aspects. And then they might do that in exchange for something, right? Like an increase in the height of the building or, maybe other permitted uses or something like that. But why are they doing that is they're trying to incentivize more resilient design, right? And more wet-proofed and resilient infrastructure or buildings that can withstand the wet areas. So thinking about other tools like that. Another thought is, and this I'd say would be a thought for down the road, but as we go beyond the mid-century, and we're going to see so many more days of high tide flooding, we're going to see certain streets that are just going to be more impacted than others. There may be parts of town that would benefit from being left to be wet. Maybe it's the town will have wet zones and the town will have dry zones. Maybe the funding that the town uses to build resilience is invested in keeping the dry areas dry and allows the wet areas to be wet. What does that mean? I don't know. Like, try to imagine just a different way of thinking about it. Floating homes. It's not out of the question. There are examples all around the country of that. Elevated streets. That's a dry flood proofing method, but maybe it's you're using kayaks to get to certain buildings and they're fully elevated. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I think that we have to really do some out-of-the-box thinking.
And just to be aware, 18 inches is the freeboard in the town of Bethany Beach. Freeboard is above the 100-year floodplain. So, there are towns. Lewis has a 36-inch freeboard. Other towns, I'm not even sure what they have, but I know that's where we are.
Here's an example of Norfolk. They have a project called Making Space for Water. So they're trying to figure out creative ways of accommodating more water and flooding because they have a big flooding problem. So in this one area of their watershed, they did a number of things. They took a historic inlet and they expanded it to increase water storage. Also, they saw these co-benefits. Well, if we increase the water storage, we're also expanding the habitat. We're creating more opportunity for recreation along, think of expansion as like the river bank is left green, and not built upon so that there can be overflow at times, but then maybe there's recreation allowed when it's dry. They employed green infrastructure along key streets to filter runoff and reduce street flooding and urban heat. What is green infrastructure? It's things like trees, it's bioswales, which is using vegetation along your streetscapes that just, you have some in Bethany, I think, or South Bethany. You have a bioswale over by, maybe it's by Sea Colony. It's a big green infiltration system that slows runoff and gives it time to percolate instead of causing road flooding. So they're using, certain native vegetation and greenways along streets to filter that runoff. They took a grassy park near an elementary school, and they designed it to have the kind of vegetation in it that would hold more water during a storm, so that it's providing an important function during a storm. But when things are dry, it's also allowing playing fields or walking paths. So parks can be really effective because, when it's stormy out, people aren't necessarily using parks anyway, right? So you can allow that park to get wet and inundated if you design it properly. And they're making streetscape improvements around town to consider stormwater. So anytime they're making improvements to the street for bike or pedestrian access or whatever, they're automatically also considering stormwater management. So again, that's how you're integrating climate resilience into all things you do. You don't want to rip up a road and create a bike lane if you're not also tackling your stormwater problem, that kind of thinking. So I think that's a wonderful example of things that we can do more of here, is how do towns like this make more space for water, and in ways that also can produce other benefits to the town. And then I'm wrapping up, but I think also there's just another side of the coin, which is we're not always going to be able to avoid impacts. And so when we have impacts, we need to have a really robust emergency response, and preparedness kind of effort in town. So that includes ahead of a storm, supporting emergency preparedness training in the community, encouraging citizens to volunteer for your community emergency response team, or CERT, and I believe there's some new CERTs standing up in this area, which is fantastic. These are folks that they're not first responders, but they kind of support the first responders. They're there to help control traffic, or to provide very light first aid, or to kind of let them know who the vulnerable residents are that the first responders need to go to, things like that. And of course, you want to support your emergency responders, right? Because they're going to have, an incredible task if we are hard hit by a big event. And, we certainly want to make sure they have all the support they need. So I'm going to stop there, I think. I know that was a lot, and thank you for your time.
I'm sure there's probably a question or two. Is there anybody that wants to, Kathy, can you do we have the microphone?
Is it recorded online?
Yes, it is.
Well, I've given my presentation to the town, so maybe they would want to, I don't know what you plan to do. You might want to ask the mayor.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to bring up, that anybody who'd like a copy of what we just saw here, we can get it to you. If you just give an email address to Raylene in the back, that'd be great.
I hope, as much as, it's very hard when I give these talks because there's a lot of, heavy content. But I hope you also see that there's avenues here that we can, there's methods we can use to help us adapt. And it'll get more challenging, as we go on. But I think that there's no better time than right now. We have the most adaptation options available to us right now. And the longer we wait, some of those options get reduced. So, there's an enormous opportunity right in front of us.
I have a question. Would any of this be helped by installing some sort of artificial reef or sinking old ships offshore to reduce the impact of the ocean?
I don't think something like that alone is really going to help. First off, you flood more from your bays than you actually do from the ocean. Your dunes are actually providing a really good service and doing a good job. So the wave action coming from the oceans with proper dune replenishment, is manageable there to some extent. It's the inundation that comes through your canal and the bays that stacks up over time and then takes its time to drain out. And that's really, I think, the bigger issue for this area. Yeah.
I think it's all great. We certainly have a plan for resilience, but, But the bottom line is, we gotta wean ourselves off fossil fuels. This is what's destroying the planet and the oceans. And I know recently down here, there's a big controversy on the windmills, US wind. And people were so far against it because, for a lot of different reasons. But, renewables are the future. We gotta get off fossil fuels. So it's more of a comment than a question.
I understand, and there's nothing about that I would really disagree with. It's important to diversify our energy portfolio and invest in renewable energy. And really, if you think of climate as a coin, and one side of the coin is how are you going to adapt to the impacts, and then the other side is that mitigation. Like how do you, make efforts to rein in greenhouse gases, right, so that you can slow that rate of warming. Both are critical, both sides of the coin. Now, I will say that our state has an important role to play. Even though we're a tiny state, we all have an important role to play in doing that. And at the same time, there's already enough greenhouse gases in the system to create enough warming for a period of time, like even without it. But the more mitigation we do now, we'll be able to temper the worst effects later in the century, and that's important. Really important. So, good point.
Which, by the way, I think a lot of people notice, but Delaware is the lowest as far as sea level. It really surprised me, because I would have thought Louisiana, but it's actually Delaware.
I know.
Or even Florida, So we
weird.
really need to be aware of this.
I know, it's true. That's true. Good points. Anybody? Yeah. I think she had a question.
Okay. This question really is for Cliff. Knowing that we're getting increased frequency and intensity of rain events, we have these events and you look around town, is there any way to have a requirement or a review of properties that are not maintaining their own water, that are not sending their water to the street as they should be? Is there any way to hold those people accountable?
We have a very, very active code enforcement officer, have had for a number of years, and you probably have met him. Many residents have. And part of what he does is look for that. One of the things we also do is whenever we get a complaint from any citizen about the direction of water from any surrounding home, we immediately look at that. And our building inspector, one of her pet issues, if you will, won't say peeves, is the direction of water during construction. So she lives that, and we try to make sure that it happens. In terms of actively going from home to home, no, we don't do that, but we're very aware of the conditions that exist because of the rain.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I also live in Lake Bethany. As a matter of fact, Bill's house and my house we share backyards with a lot of water in between. So I'm new here. I've only lived here for 6 years, well, 2 permanently, but. So I heard Danielle say that that we are allowed to use fill space in Sussex County. Are we allowed to use it in Bethany?
If you're filling to any extent where you're going to alter the flow of runoff on your property, you would have to have that conversation with the building inspector before you brought the fill onto your property.
It
So the
wouldn't
building
be for my property, but it's for a property next door to me that has maybe a 1.5-foot drop between my property and their property.
So are they complaining that you're putting water on their property?
Nope, I'm just scared about when that property will be developed.
Well, and at the point in time that happens, again, when we issue permits, we're very, very aware of runoff and where it goes and what happens
Thank
to
you.
it. So.
I have another question. Bethany has an upper limit. I'm under the understanding that Bethany has an upper limit of how high a house inside Bethany can be.
Yes.
The house that we bought is off the ground like 4 or 5 feet. And then we have 2 full stories, and then we have a full attic up above. So I believe we're very near the upper limit. We wouldn't ever be able to raise our house unless we took off the attic. Or are you all thinking in the future that maybe that height limit should be raised?
I don't think there's any interest. That was quite a contentious issue a number of years ago in Bethany Beach, home height, because of some of the construction that we were seeing where people were blocking out the sun and flat roofs, and the aesthetic wasn't very appealing either. But at the point in time, you have an interest in doing that, again, checking with the building inspector or having a preliminary discussion with the building inspector about where your height is and where you might be able to go is what I would suggest to you.
Thank you.
You're
By the
welcome.
way, I live in John Eckridge's house, who used to be the building inspector.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Do we have any other questions, comments? Committee, anybody got any thoughts? Danielle? Fantastic. Thank you again. I noticed one of those pictures in there was the Bethany Boardwalk where it was very eroded.
Yeah.
I know exactly when that picture was taken.
Yeah.
To move on to other portions of our committee today, I've got a few updates I'm going to make on regional resilience efforts. I will kind of open it up to see if there's any questions as I go over each one. So first of all, I wanted to update on beach replenishment. Our federal representatives obtained $10 million in federal grant monies for the U.S. For the Corps of Engineers Delaware Coastal Beach replenishment through the fiscal year 2026 appropriations bill earlier this year. DENREC has as well reached out to federal legislatures as part of the fiscal year 2027 congressional directed spending request to strongly request an additional $30 million in order to allow beach replenishment for Rehoboth, Dewey, Bethany, and South Bethany beaches. They requested municipal letters from each of the towns to support their effort, and of course, Bethany did, as well as all the other towns. So we'll see where that one progresses to. It's not a great atmosphere in Washington at the moment, so we'll see how it goes. And if anybody has any questions, please let me know.
I have a question. I see a tractor on the north side of the bridge doing stuff, like it's been at least several weeks, maybe months. Is that a replenishment project? Are they just moving sand around?
Well, what you're talking up at the inlet?
Yeah.
What you're seeing there is there is a pumping, as the sand moves from south to north. And when the bridge was built, there was a system to pump the sand from the south side to the north side. It was built into the bridge. It did operate for a little while when the bridge was first built. Then they had problems with the pump. And it was out of commission for 5 years. That's probably why we had a breach up there. We had 2 breaches 2 years ago. What you're seeing now is the pump is now operational, and they are pumping sand from the south side of the inlet to the north side. And if you look over there, there is a pipe that comes down from the bridge. It's actually underground, but you can see it running down the beach. And they are the tractor, the bulldozer that you were noting, is moving the sand around and positioning it for so that the sand settles out.
And do they have funds? Is that DENREC paying for that?
That is DENREC, and they do have funds. It's there's a contract with an independent contractor who is operating it now. So that's, yes. Did I get it?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Prior to that, the Corps allocated $8 million to rebuild the beach on the north side of the inlet. So
Yeah, I mean, there was a project before that where they did a lot of replenishment up there. They did pump it, they had a dredge out offshore and pumped up sand onto the beach. So there's been multiple efforts up there. To follow up, we had Senator Blunt Rochester in town in January to review the beach and resilience status. A further meeting occurred during the winter with Congresswoman Sarah McBride and several from council, including Rich McHugh and Mickey Hinman and myself went to Washington for the Delaware League of Local Governments, which is a group that is a collaborative group of all governments, local governments in the state. Had what was called Hill Day, where we had the opportunity to meet with all our federal legislators, and we did, and had some very candid discussions on several important topics, but coastal resilience was, of course, at the top of our list. We definitely have their attention. There's very positive steps they're working on. Unfortunately, federal government funding is not moving very quickly and probably won't in the very near future. I would hope that DENEREC's efforts to get additional funding through congressional appropriations in the 2027 fiscal year will be fruitful. We'll see how that goes. I think things are loosening up a little bit. Our legislators are more positive than they have been, so. As you know, all the beach dune crossovers are open, although after the winter storms, the dune and the beach requires maintenance, and this is normally it's a normal thing which usually occurs in the spring and summer. DENEREC normally does this. They have indicated that they will be here. Actually, they indicated early this week that they would be here this week, but I haven't. Have they been here?
not that I've seen, Mayor. no.
Okay, I haven't seen them either. So I would hope they're here shortly. This includes expanding and shaping of the crossovers so that we can put our Moby mats down and operate normally. It includes putting up rope railings, as you see down here at the end at Garfield, but they would be on all the crossovers. It also includes shaping up and getting it serviceable, the handicap crossover up on Wellington. It won't be brought to handicap status until a next replenishment, but it will be a usable crossover. The new DENEREC required shoreline public access plan requirement. I think probably some of you have read about it and have heard what it is. Basically, it is a plan to that all the coastal towns have to present a plan, complete a plan, and there are several criteria they have to address to DENEREC, which outlines what they're going to do to, and what they are doing to maintain public access to our beaches. And that includes public services in terms of toilet facilities, adequate parking, that sort of thing. And we've had initial meetings with town management. It's had initial discussions with DENEREC, and Bethany Beach is looking pretty good with this. I mean, obviously, we do a lot of things in town to promote the public and to accommodate the public. We're a tourist town. That's bottom line. So this has due by July the 1st. I think it'll be a very positive thing for Bethany. primarily, and that will bring us right to the top of the list as far as eligibility for replenishment using federal funding. So we're actually looking forward to this. I think there's some communities that are not going to be, but Bethany Beach is actually looking forward to this, and I think it'll be a very positive thing. Does anybody have any questions or any thoughts or comments? Cliff's going to go through some resilience efforts that the town is working on. I'll pass it off to you, Cliff.
Mayor, once again, the same list, too. So Bethany Beach floods, our title issue, the flooding that you see on Pennsylvania Avenue, and if you see it on Pennsylvania Avenue, then at least 1/3 of the community is full of water, and all of our swales and the ditches in the community are also full of water. That's something, as a residents know, something that can happen to Bethany Beach 30 to 40 times a year. And flooding, our tidal flooding occurs because water enters the Assawoman and it's pushed from the Assawoman into the loop and then pushes from the loop to the southern portion of the community because the community is graded on a whole towards the north. So our swales fill because of that, streets flood because of that. Rainwater doesn't flow out of town because at the same time we're having rain events, the water in the Loop Canal rises and the Assawoman rises, so the water has nowhere to go. 20 years ago, 20-some years ago, a similar committee began a dialogue or discussion about a way to maybe prohibit water from entering the Loop Canal from the Assawoman, and the idea of a dam was first looked at and studied. At that point in time, that group took the issue to DENREC, had a meeting with the cabinet secretary of the department at that time, John Hughes, as long ago as that was, and it was determined by some preliminary study that wasn't very detailed that if we put a dam at the confluence of the loop and the Assawoman, but potentially we would flood other communities. Over the years, we've had other engineers look at that, and about 10 years ago, entered into a study with the Corps to look at the potential of a dam and potential impacts. That study indicated that the impacts would be less than we thought, and the Corps at that point in time recommended that we do a further study using more modern technology and the ability to use 2D and 3D analysis to look at potential impacts. We did that, determined that the dam would have very, very little impact, if at all, and if the dam was only 3 feet tall, it would have no impact on our surrounding communities, yet at the same time would take care of 95+% of our nuisance flooding, which is this ongoing flooding we see in the community. Not only that, but depending on how the dam was activated, if it was activated before a significant rain event, absent a tidal event, it would also act as a basin to catch rainwater and allow rainwater to flow to a point out of our swales and into essentially a sump, which would be the saw pond in the Loop Canal itself. We brought that new information to DENREC during, I guess, the midpoint of the last governor's administration, and it sat dormant with very little support for almost 5 years from that administration. The new administration has been in office a little over a year, and the difference in terms of community support with this group as opposed to the other group has been astounding. For years, we were dealing with the thought that we would not be able to build the dam because of deed restrictions imposed by the Corps and U.S. Park Service. With DENREC's intervention, the Corps immediately said this was a non-issue. Parks said, who also had some deed restrictions, came back to say that they would have no issue with what we were proposing in terms of the dam's construction if, in fact, we were able to demonstrate that we could and promise we would create a portage from the loop to the Assawoman Canal for people wanting to move kayaks and canoes from one to the other. So we're in the process of having that designed by our engineers. And another point of good news, back in 2023, the town applied for a grant from FEMA, a grant of almost $400,000 to do design and engineering work for a dam. In March of '26, the town was advised that we were awarded the grant, but Good news and bad news, we were awarded the grant in March of '26, but the completion date for the grant is August of '26. So right now, instead of being able to move ahead and aggressively with any permitting issues, our engineers are working with DEMA, the FEMA agency that represents FEMA in state, to look for a grant extension, and that's in the works right now. DEMA is optimistic that the extension will be granted and we'll be able to move ahead and move down with the permitting process. So that's all favorable news, and it's the first time we've had anything really favorable about the dam for really a long time. The town has just completed constructing a retaining wall. No longer should we call it a bulkhead, as I understand it, and that's at the land spit in Lake Bethany. And the retaining wall was on the north side of the land spit because the land spit was degrading and falling into the loop canal, and it was getting especially hard to maintain any sort of portage, if you will, through the loop canal because of the amount of that land spit had degraded into the loop. And it also had pushed into the point in time that it's almost impossible to enter the saw pond without some sort of dredging, which at some point in time in the future we hope we're able to do. That retaining wall is now complete. The equipment that has not been able to move out of the loop almost for 2 months because of the aftermath of the storm and the trees and the asphalt is now gone, and that is open. And the second part of that project is to create a living retaining wall on the south side of the land spit, and that'll be biologs and some other composite material that over time will degrade but will stabilize the bank. Right now, that's still involved in a permitting issue with DENREC, and we hope to have that resolved sometime soon. And that's something we could actually do in the summer if our permitting comes through. The rookery that's there for the herons will have been served its purpose, and we'll be able to do that construction in the summer, when and if the permitting is finally obtained. There is a drainage study that's looking at, say, the far west quadrant of Bethany West that we've commissioned several months ago, not several months ago, say about 4 months ago with Pannoni Engineering. Pannoni has a preliminary report out, a preliminary analysis. They determined that they needed to do more survey work. They have been out on site last week, have done more survey work. They're going to be putting that into their CAD system, updating that, and will be coming back to us with some recommendations. Preliminarily, what Pannoni is telling us, they believe the culverts in this area, which again is the area closest to Sea Colony in Bethany West, where our open swales are adequate to take care of 2-year and 10-year rain events, but most of our closed piping, which includes a lot of driveway piping, is not adequate to move water. And that's just a very quick look, and they'll be coming back to us with a more detailed list of recommendations for us, and hopefully at some point in time, it's something we can do and certainly maybe fun to do in the near future. Some time ago, we commissioned what you could call a resiliency report that plugs into so many of the things that Danielle was talking about today with Pannoni. That report has been done for some time. We have 2 edits we would like Pannoni to make on this report, and staff will be asking the council and the mayor to probably schedule some sort of a public meeting or special meeting to review that sea level rise study report by Pannoni in May. And Mayor, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. Any questions?
Yeah, so on the Bladder Dam, is there any reason the town can't pursue permitting with the Army Corps and/or DENREC now? What's holding that up?
The town, our engineers will be doing the permitting process for us. Right now, what they need to resolve is the extension of the grant that's allowing them, will fund them to do the work. As soon as that's resolved, they'll begin to actively pursue permitting.
So it's just they won't pursue the permitting until they get paid?
No, we want to take advantage of the grant. We would be wise to do that for $400,000 of town dollars, and if it takes us 30 to 60 days or whatever that might be to try to resolve that, then it's our benefit to do that as opposed to moving forward.
Is there any way that the town could basically keep the community posted on or maybe they do already, and I apologize if I'm just ignorant of that, what's going on and how long things are going to take and what the end game is?
There's been very little to post, unfortunately, as I think I just went through the little bit of a history until recently. I think at the point in time where the grant extension has been made and the permitting process begins, we'll begin some sort of a feature on the new website that we'll be introducing here in the next couple of months that'll talk about ongoing projects. And that new website will have a feature where projects that are ongoing, like the Loop Canal Dam, will be updated on an ongoing basis.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and updates have been monthly anyway, usually at town council meetings. If anybody's got a question, and it's usually updated anyway, but, please come and ask questions.
Mr. Mayor, if I may. One
Please.
thing I think that would be helpful, if you look at the crowd here, we've got a lot of the same people, and thanks for coming. I appreciate you always coming to these meetings, but there's so few here, and we have so many property owners, and we have a third of the town that's worried about nuisance flooding and the mechanical flat dam. So I think it would be really good if we could explore ways to post a timeline with all the activities, and make this all a little bit more transparent. Timelines slip, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think a lot of what I hear as I walk around town from folks is, what's going on? What are the next steps? When is this going to happen or that going to happen? When do you fill out the application and apply? When do you go for 401 water quality certification? When do you do your endangered species stuff? I just think, per Zach's comment that it would be really helpful to get something posted because so few people come to these meetings and they miss all the good information that you and Cliff provide. So it's just a suggestion.
Well, I think what Cliff was telling, that the town is revamping the website, and I think it's June. Is it June?
June, it should be operational, we hope, yes. We'll probably do a dry run maybe towards the end of May, really. So June operational. One of the deficiencies we've had, probably because we don't do that many large projects, is an ongoing project update process. And one of the features this new web update will have is its own set of pages dealing with specific projects and ongoing updates. So,
Yeah, and as you see out right now, there's a lot of projects going on. They're getting ready. It looks like they're going to start on Monday right here, the new crossover on the north side of Garfield at Route 1. They've already started doing sidewalk work and crosswalk over at the Kent crossing, and they will be starting another one out by the diner and the Wawa, the center safety islands that will be going in the next month or so.
and Chip, do a lot of people really ask you when the 401 permitting process will begin?
Some do, actually, they do. And, you'd be surprised.
I would be, yes.
And having taught thousands of Corps of Engineers employees how to do these permits, I'm pretty aware that people are worried about that because they know it's a likely showstopper. Just the coordination takes time, and EPA is not always the fastest person to get off the dime. And if they've delegated it to DENREC, that's more time. So it's just one of these things we want to check. I know you're trying to be funny there, Cliff, but
No,
this is
I'm
serious.
serious because I think I've seen some exchanges where we're talking about people are interested specifically in those things, and that surprises me. But the one important point, and sometimes various staff members are asked about this permit or that permit, that is not in the area of town staff expertise, and which is why we retain a very excellent engineering firm in McCormick Taylor to make those applications and make those permits. And we say continually that we will apply for everything we need to, all approvals and all permits, and we're comfortable that that will be done the way it should be done in a timely manner. When we begin the process, we'll have more to say about it, but the process has not begun.
There are some public handouts that we could consider. I'm happy to provide them. I have them in my reference notebook here. They're just simple flow diagrams, and you guys can look at them and decide if you want to post them and share them as just an example for information. Here's the permitting process, one page, it's just a diagram. And it's the kind of thing that we often use with the public in public meetings all over the country. So it's standard stock, correct, and it might help folks at least have a general understanding of what's going on. Because it's all a great mystery to many people. It's even a mystery to me, having dealt with it for, 40 years. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's not very quick. Things move very slowly, which is frustrating. Coming from the private sector, very frustrating. So, okay, the last thing we have on our agenda today is, and Matt usually covers it, but I will today, is our Bethany homeowners help fight flooding in town. It's a pamphlet. Please pick them up. They're out in the lobby. And we have A-frames up with pamphlets around town, down at the boardwalk and down at the bandstand. So things that you can do in your yard and on your property to help the town. And a lot of the same things that Danielle was talking about. So if nobody has any other comments or questions, I'm going to make a motion to adjourn.
Mayor, I did want to thank Danielle for the idea of floating homes, because I think this resolves a lot of things here that we have not thought about in the community. So, thank you.
Do you want to volunteer your house first?
Let's hope we don't get to that. Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Second. Those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much for coming. And thanks for all those online.